Piers Morgan pressed Richard Dawkins on his show about atheism and the belief in God. According to Richard Dawkins, physicists are not saying you cannot use the word before when you're asking about the origin of the universe, which is nonsensical and defies the law of logic. Richard Dawkins, as an atheist, obviously agree with them because he's the one that says this.
What would it take for you to believe in God?
Well, I used to say it would be very simple. It would be, the second coming of Jesus, or a great big, deep, booming bass Paul Robeson voice saying, "I am God and I created." Even if there was this booming voice and the second coming in clouds of glory, the more probable explanation is that it's a hallucination or a conjuring trick by David Copperfield or something. A supernatural explanation for anything is incoherent, but it just doesn't it doesn't add up to an explanation for anything.
So what would persuade you?
Well, I'm starting to think nothing would, which in a way goes against the grain, because I've always paid lip service to the view that a scientist should change his mind when evidence is forthcoming. The trouble is, I can't think what that evidence would look like.
Yeah, according to Richard Dawkins, God talking to him is not good enough. Now, let's hear what he has to say on Piers Morgan's show. Take a look.
Let's talk about this issue of God, because we had a long chat about this last time. I do believe, for what it's worth, I do believe in God. I do believe in an afterlife. I find it comforting. I also find, as I said to you last time, I find it explains things which are otherwise completely inexplicable. And we had a guest on recently, Professor Stephen C. Meyer, who's a prominent believer in intelligent design, or what he calls the God hypothesis. He watched our last interview that you and I had, and this is what he said about it.
Dawkins wants to portray theistic belief as if it's equivalent to belief in fairies, and he'll concede that, well, it's possible. But I think there's a stronger argument for the theistic case. And that is that when scientists and philosophers reason from evidence, they typically use a method of reasoning that has a technical name. It's called inferring to the best explanation, where the best explanation is one where you're invoking a cause which has the kind of powers that would be required to explain the phenomenon of interest. And you correctly pointed out in your conversation with him that when you get back to that, what physicists often call the singularity, the point where matter, space, time, and energy begin to exist, the materialist is really up against a huge conundrum, because prior to the origin of matter, there is no matter to do the causing. That's what we mean by the origin of matter, that's where it starts.
Right.
And so if you want to invoke a cause which is sufficient to explain the origin of matter, you can't invoke matter. It's in principle, the materialistic explanations are in principle insufficient. So you need to invoke something which is external to the material universe and is not bounded by time and space as well. And that starts to paint a picture of the kind of cause you would need that has the sort of attributes that traditional theists have traditionally associated with God.
Now, you see, Richard Dawkins, this is the nub of, I think, my whole issue with your position on this. And you can respond, obviously, to what you just heard in a moment. But given your new book is about the genetic book of the dead, and it effectively takes us from here to in perpetuity on a genetic trail where each part of existence feeds the next and so on. And I totally subscribe to that. The genome of every body and every organization and so on creates, as you say, a comprehensive dossier on all the world as it moves forward. I get it. But when you go back to the very start, what is there before that? And that, I think I asked you last time, and Professor Meyer brought that up again as being the flaw in your position, which is, what is there before it starts? What is nothing?
This is a question for a physicist, not a biologist, but what I would answer to Professor Meyer is that we need to explain complexity in terms of simplicity. And of course it's true that I cannot say what was there before the Big Bang. Physicists sometimes tell us that the word before doesn't even mean anything before the Big Bang. But whatever it was, it
but it has to, doesn't it?
You cannot suddenly invoke...
Doesn't it have to? I mean, someone as logical as you are, and I believe you are, you think about this all very logically. A logical mind surely has to appreciate that before the Big Bang, there has to have been something before then. Otherwise, what is nothing?
A physicist will tell you that
yeah, but what do you tell me?
I'm trying to tell you what a physicist would say first of all. They would say that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang. Time began at the Big Bang. There was no before the Big Bang. I know it's contrary to common sense. Physicists don't necessarily deal with common sense.
Well, it makes no sense, does it? And that's what I mean. I think you're a logical man. That cannot make sense to you. The idea that you're not even allowed to use the word before the Big Bang, when every part of both of our brains tells us that that's obviously nonsensical, doesn't that make you think again?
We are not physicists. I, like you, am completely baffled by what physicists say to me, which is that you cannot use the word before for before the Big Bang. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Now that is totally counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive to me, it's counterintuitive to you, it's counterintuitive to Stephen Meyer, but we are not physicists. And you need to talk to a physicist. Talk to a physicist about that. And they will tell you that you cannot use the word before for the Big Bang.
Yeah, but you think that's as preposterous as I do.
I do, because I'm not a physicist.
You've just written a book as a biologist called The Genetic Book of the Dead, in which you talk about the body and the genome, comprehensive dossiers and so on. So you're prepared to expound a philosophy based on that as a biologist, which I completely respect, and it makes perfect sense. The book makes perfect sense the way that you have written it. But why would you then think that a physicist cannot be contradicted just simply because they're a physicist? I can contradict what you say as a biologist.
No, you really aren't getting it. I'm so sorry. Modern physics is exceedingly mysterious. It really is. I mean, have you tried to read some of the difficult modern physics books? It really is very difficult to understand. And intuition doesn't do it. You cannot use human intuition. Human intuition was built up by evolution over many millions of years to survive on the African plain, hunting and gathering, looking for waterholes, looking for mates and so on. Our brains were not built to understand the profundities of the origin of the universe, the end of the universe, the kind of things that physicists deal with. I think it's actually amazing that at least some human brains are capable of dealing with this kind of stuff. My brain isn't, and nor is yours.
No, but that's my point, though.
I wish it were.
Well, yeah, I wish both our brains could. But the truth is, it's because the human brain can't comprehend this, including, I don't think, any physicist. Because the moment they say you can't have before the Big Bang, they lose me completely just on a common sense perspective. It's that reason that I think there has to be a power that is greater than the human brain. And that gives me succor to my belief in God, and why I think people turn to gods of different types, obviously. They turn to that because it is incomprehensible otherwise what has happened here.
There has to be something more difficult to understand than the human brain can understand. I accept that. But it doesn't have to be God. It doesn't have to be the kind of God who, I don't know, forgives sins and listens to prayers and things like that. There is something very mysterious, and I don't understand it, and you don't understand it, and maybe we never will. I think it's not clear whether physicists understand it. Some do, some don't, but it's obviously going to be very mysterious. But God is not that interesting mystery. God is just a personification of human desires, a father figure, something like that, somebody who looks after you. You said at the beginning that it was comforting for you. God is somebody who listens to prayers, who forgives sins, who takes action for the benefit of humanity or not, as the case may be. We're not talking about that now. We're talking about deeply, deeply mysterious, profound things which physics is working on, and it's very difficult to understand. And the fact that you don't understand it and I don't understand it is not good grounds for suddenly invoking a supernatural sky daddy.
But if our genomes, if our genetic background has all the information which has led to us being what we are today, and that will obviously extrapolate as we go forward, then it does beg the question, doesn't it? Where does the original information come from?
Yes, it does, and as far as a biologist is concerned, we're talking about the original information coming at the origin of life, and that's something which biologists and chemists and physicists can deal with. But you've gone right back to the origin of the universe, to the Big Bang, which is another matter entirely, and which is not really relevant to the biological question of what happens once biology gets started, which is the origin of genetics, actually. It's the origin of the information which is passed from generation to generation, from living creature to living creature. That started maybe 3.8, maybe 4 billion years ago. The universe started more like 13.8 billion years ago, which is a much longer time ago, and which is a totally different question, nothing to do with biology.
But doesn't code have to have a coder?
No, of course it doesn't. Code arises spontaneously at the origin of life, something very, very simple, probably, at the origin of life, which was not genetic, not DNA at least. It would have been some kind of genetic, some kind of coding, which would be a self-replicating molecule. Once you get a self-replicating molecule, then you have the possibility of mutation, which is a mistake in coding.
But where does that come from?
You were about to say something?
Yeah, where does it come from?
It comes from a random accident in chemistry at some time around 3.8 to 4 billion years ago.
And what? Okay, but what? I don't want to labour this point, but I'm genuinely fascinated. Genuinely.
Okay.
So it happened 4 billion years ago. There was this chemical thing.
How can something random create something that is so complex, has coding? It doesn't make any sense. How can somebody accept this just come by accident? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But let's continue with the video.
Whatever. But what was there before the chemical thing?
Oh, well, there was chemistry. There was plenty going on before then, because we've got about 11 billion years, 10 million years to play with there. So there was plenty going on. What happened 4 billion years ago was a spontaneous, accidental arising of a molecule which made copies of itself. That was a very improbable event, admittedly, a very improbable event. But once it happened, then everything about biology was able to take over.
But you're making a number of informed assumptions based on what you believe happened. But you do concede that you don't know what happened before all that, because your brain, like mine, cannot compute that. So do you accept that stuff could have gone on before that, which makes everything you're saying completely wrong?
You're talking about two different kinds of before. You're talking about the origin of the universe, and now we're talking about the origin of life.
Well, I'm just saying, if you go back generally billions of years, none of us were there. Right? Everyone's got their view about what may or may not have happened. But do you accept that the way that your brain has computed what is likely to have happened to get us to where we are today, it could be based on a false original pretext?
I accepted that for the origin of the universe, which is another matter. Now we're talking about the origin of life. And again, we don't know how that happened, but there's nothing like so mysterious as the origin of the universe. The origin of life is a tractable problem. It may never be solved, but it's not in the same league as the origin of the universe. Now, the origin of life is something which chemists are working on, and they may solve it in a certain sense. They may find a suitable model, a plausible model, of how a self-replicating molecule came into existence. There's no mystery about there being chemistry before then. There was chemistry before then. There was plenty of organic chemistry going on. Now, somewhere around 4 billion years ago, a molecule arose which had the unusual property, not totally impossible, but unusual property, of making copies of itself. Now, once that happened, then you have the possibility of Darwinian life getting going. And that's something which we understand. And we understand in principle the kind of thing that could have given rise to that first self-replicating molecule. And it's an active field of research, but it's not a field that is necessarily going to yield results, because it happened a long time ago under conditions that we can't repeat now. But that's not a big mystery like the origin of the universe.
But are they not? Okay.
If you're a physicist and you tell me I cannot use the word before, then you lose all credibility, because that is a cop out. That is you being lazy. That is you trying to stop the conversation from going. And the thing is, what is nothing? How do you define nothing? What is nothing made of? Let's start there first. Anyway, if you're an atheist watching this video and you want to know the evidence for God, just look at the universe. Order and design of the universe point to a designer. Just like if I go outside, I see a house. I know there's a builder. I don't have to assume there's a builder. I know it. Likewise, when we see the universe, when we see people, when we see the animal kingdom, when we see DNA, how complex it is, we know there's a creator. We know someone made this because it is too complex. It cannot happen by accident. May God bless you, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.